Your soulmate saying, "I can't keep this secret any longer, you deserve to know everything. My beloved child." There is a reason your soulmate has been carrying certain words in silence, and tonight that silence has become heavier than the secret itself. They have reached the point where pretending everything is normal no longer feels possible. Somewhere behind the calm expression, behind the ordinary conversations, behind every moment when they almost reached out and then stopped, one sentence has been repeating inside them: "I can't keep this secret any longer. You deserve to know everything." But here is what makes this different from anything you may be expecting: the secret is not simply about what happened. It is about what they realized because of what happened. Don't skip, because the smallest detail is the one that changes the entire meaning of this story. For a long time, your soulmate believed silence would protect both of you. They convinced themselves that waiting was safer, that another day would somehow make the truth easier to explain. Yet every time they thought about you, that decision became harder to defend. They remembered moments you probably considered ordinary. A conversation that ended too quickly, a look that lasted a second longer than expected, a message they typed and erased, a night when they wanted to tell you everything but couldn't find the courage to begin. What you never saw was what happened afterward. They replayed those moments privately, wondering whether they had already waited too long. And then something unexpected happened. Someone asked them a simple question about you. Nothing dramatic. Nothing planned. But your soulmate froze because the answer exposed something they had been hiding even from themselves. They could no longer describe you as just someone important. The words didn't feel true anymore. Their feelings had grown beyond the safe explanation they had been using. Stay till the end, because what they admitted next was even more surprising. They finally said aloud that losing your presence would affect them far more deeply than they had ever allowed anyone to know. That confession changed the atmosphere instantly. Suddenly, every excuse they had used for remaining silent sounded weak. And for the first time, your soulmate understood that the real danger was not telling you the truth, it was allowing another day to pass while you believed their silence meant they didn't care. What happened after that realization is where everything begins to turn. Your soulmate started looking back at the choices that created distance between you, and one particular memory refused to leave their mind. There was a moment when they had the perfect opportunity to be honest. You were closer to the truth than you realized. They almost told you. They almost opened the door completely. But fear interrupted them, not fear of you, but fear of what honesty would change. Because once certain feelings are spoken aloud, there is no returning to the comfortable uncertainty that existed before. So they stepped backward when their heart wanted to move forward. And you may have interpreted that distance in an entirely different way. You may have wondered whether you mattered. You may have questioned why someone who seemed emotionally connected could suddenly become difficult to understand. But your soulmate knows something now that they did not understand then. Silence can create a story that was never true. And they are terrified that their silence may have caused you to believe the wrong story. Don't skip. Something huge is waiting for you, because this is where the hidden truth becomes more personal. Your soulmate has been protecting something that involves a decision about the future. They have quietly imagined what it would mean to stop running from the connection and finally choose honesty. They pictured the conversation. They imagined your expression. They wondered whether you would believe them after so much hesitation. And then they asked themselves the question they had avoided for far too long: what if they move on before I finally speak? That question shook them. Suddenly, waiting no longer felt harmless. Every day of silence became a risk. Every unanswered feeling became another chance for misunderstanding. Your soulmate began realizing that you deserve clarity, not confusing signals. You deserve truth, not half-finished sentences. You deserve to know why they pulled away when they wanted closeness, why they stayed quiet when they had so much to say, and why your name kept returning to their thoughts even when they tried to focus elsewhere. But there is still one detail they haven't revealed, and it is the detail that explains why this confession has become urgent now. Something happened recently, something small from the outside but enormous to them. They heard something connected to your future, and suddenly they understood that the time they assumed they had might not remain available forever. Now your soulmate is standing emotionally at a doorway they cannot keep avoiding. Behind them is the old pattern: hesitation, hidden feelings, unfinished conversations, and all those moments when they told themselves, "I'll explain later." In front of them is the possibility of finally telling you everything, even if they cannot predict your response. And this time, they are leaning toward the truth. Stay till the end, because their secret is deeper than a simple confession of affection. They have been carrying regret. They regret making you guess what they should have explained. They regret allowing pride and uncertainty to speak louder than sincerity. Most of all, they regret one specific choice that created a misunderstanding between you. Your soulmate now realizes that you may have judged their feelings based on what they did outwardly, while internally something completely different was happening. When they became distant, they were thinking about you. When they became quiet, there were words waiting behind that silence. When they acted as though everything was under control, they were privately questioning whether they had already damaged something precious. And now comes the revelation they have been struggling to admit: they never truly wanted you to disappear from their life. Even during the confusing moments, even when circumstances seemed to push everything in another direction, some part of them continued holding on to the possibility that your story was unfinished. Something huge is waiting for you, because they are no longer asking themselves whether they should tell you. The question has changed. Now they are asking how they can possibly explain everything without overwhelming you. They want you to understand the beginning, the hesitation, the mistake, the realization, and the decision that followed. They want to tell you why your absence felt louder than expected. They want to explain why certain memories suddenly became impossible to ignore. They want you to know that the truth they kept postponing has finally become more powerful than the fear that kept it hidden. And there is one sentence they have rehearsed more than once, imagining the moment they finally stand before you with nothing left concealed: "I should have told you sooner." But that is not the biggest confession. Not even close. Because behind those words is another truth. One they have never said clearly, one that explains every strange moment, every hesitation, and every time they almost came closer before stopping themselves. Your soulmate knows that once this final truth reaches you, you may look back at everything differently. The silence. The distance. The timing. All of it. And the reason they can't keep this secret any longer is because they have finally made a decision about you that they once believed they would never be brave enough to make. The decision your soulmate has finally made did not come from one emotional moment. It came after days of fighting against a truth that kept returning stronger every time they tried to ignore it. They realized they could continue protecting their pride, or they could protect the possibility of something meaningful with you, but they could no longer do both. And what happened next surprised even them. They stopped asking, "What if telling the truth changes everything?" and started asking, "What if staying silent makes me lose everything?" Don't skip, because this is where the secret begins opening in a completely different direction. Your soulmate has been carrying feelings they deliberately made smaller whenever anyone asked about you. They changed the subject. They acted unaffected. They convinced people around them that everything was under control. But privately, your name kept appearing in the quietest moments. A familiar place reminded them of you. A random conversation brought back something you once said. Even ordinary moments suddenly carried memories they could not explain away. And then came the realization they were never prepared for. They had been trying so hard not to reveal how important you were that they accidentally created the impression that you were not important at all. That realization stayed with them. It made them revisit every moment when you might have needed reassurance but received silence instead. It made them remember every opportunity they had to be clear but chose uncertainty because uncertainty felt safer. And now they understand what that silence may have cost. Stay till the end, because there is something your soulmate wants you to know about that distance. It was never as simple as losing interest. In fact, the closer they came to understanding what you meant to them, the more nervous they became about saying it incorrectly. They knew a careless confession could create expectations they were afraid they could not immediately fulfill, so they waited for the perfect moment. But the perfect moment never arrived. Instead, time moved forward, circumstances changed, and suddenly they noticed something they had refused to consider before: your life was moving forward too. You were not standing still waiting for them to become ready. And that changed everything. For the first time, they imagined you becoming genuinely happy without them, no longer wondering what their silence meant, no longer looking backward, and that possibility forced them to confront exactly what they had been hiding. But the deepest secret is still underneath all of this, because your soulmate has not only been hiding feelings, they have been hiding a promise they quietly made to themselves after one unforgettable moment involving you. There was something about the way you handled a difficult situation, something about your strength when nobody was applauding, that changed the way they saw you. You may not even remember the moment clearly. To you, it may have been another ordinary day. To them, it became evidence that what they felt was not based on imagination. They saw something real in your character. And that night, privately, they admitted something they had resisted for a long time. If I ever get the opportunity to make this right, I cannot waste it again. Something huge is waiting for you, because that private promise is the reason their behavior has started changing. They are no longer satisfied with watching from a distance and hoping circumstances somehow bring you together. They know meaningful connections cannot survive forever on assumptions. Somebody eventually has to speak. Somebody has to become brave enough to replace confusion with clarity. And your soulmate now believes that responsibility belongs to them. Yet there is one complication. They are afraid you may no longer see them the way you once did. That possibility has become the final wall between the secret and the confession. They wonder whether you will listen. They wonder whether you will question why it took so long. They wonder whether their explanation will arrive after your heart has already learned to expect nothing from them. But even with those fears, something inside them has changed. They would rather hear your honest response than spend another season wondering what could have happened if they had simply told you everything. Don't skip, because their next realization was almost impossible for them to accept. They cannot control your answer. They can only control whether they finally become truthful. And that realization gave them a strange kind of courage. They began mentally preparing for the conversation, not as someone trying to pressure you into choosing them, but as someone ready to finally give you the information you deserved from the beginning. No games. No confusing signals. No pretending. Just the truth about why they withdrew, what they discovered during the distance, and what they now want to do differently. Yet there is still one missing piece. The event that pushed them from thinking about confessing to actually preparing themselves to do it. And when you understand what happened, their sudden urgency will make complete sense. It happened when your soulmate unexpectedly heard your name mentioned in connection with a new possibility in your life. They did not know whether what they heard was completely accurate, but accuracy almost stopped mattering because their emotional reaction revealed everything. Their expression changed. Their thoughts raced ahead. Suddenly, all those comfortable excuses about waiting collapsed. They imagined another person recognizing your value without hesitation. They imagined someone else giving you the clarity they had withheld. And instead of feeling entitled to your attention, your soulmate felt something much more revealing: regret. They understood that if someone else eventually becomes important to you, they cannot blame timing, circumstances, or anyone else. They had opportunities to speak. They simply were not ready. Stay till the end, because this realization did something powerful. It transformed their secret from something they were protecting into something they desperately needed to release. They began remembering your patience, your presence, and the little ways you made an impact without demanding recognition. Suddenly, they could see the entire story from your side. How confusing their behavior must have looked. How many unanswered questions they may have created. How unfair it would be to expect you to understand feelings they never properly expressed. And that is why the words inside them have become so clear: you deserve to know everything. Not just the beautiful parts. Not just the convenient explanation. Everything. The fear. The hesitation. The misunderstanding. The moment they realized what you meant to them. The reason they kept returning emotionally even while remaining silent outwardly. And most importantly, the decision they have now made about what happens next. Something huge is waiting for you, because your soulmate is preparing to stop hiding behind uncertainty. They want to approach you differently this time, with patience, honesty, and respect for whatever you decide after hearing them. But before they can do that, there is one final secret they must confess, and this is the truth they have struggled hardest to say aloud. During the time you may have believed they were forgetting you, they were actually comparing every possible future to the connection they had experienced with you. And nothing felt quite the same. That realization frightened them because it meant this was no passing emotion they could simply wait out. It had survived distance. It had survived silence. It had survived every attempt to rationalize it away. Now they are beginning to understand why. Because there was one specific thing about you they noticed long ago but never told you, and once they finally explain what it was, you will understand why walking away from this connection became far harder for them than anyone ever knew. There is one detail your soulmate has never been able to erase from their memory, and it is not something dramatic that everyone else would have noticed. It was the way you made them feel understood without forcing them to explain every hidden emotion. Somewhere along the way, they noticed that around you they did not have to perform, impress, or constantly prove themselves. You saw pieces of them that other people overlooked, and instead of using those pieces against them, you simply remembered them. A small preference. A passing concern. A dream they mentioned only once. Something they thought nobody had heard. You remembered, and that stayed with them far longer than you ever knew. Don't skip, because this is where the secret becomes much bigger than attraction. Your soulmate realized that what kept pulling their thoughts back toward you was not merely how much they liked you, it was how rare it felt to be genuinely seen. They tried convincing themselves they could find that feeling anywhere. They told themselves distance would eventually make everything ordinary again. But every comparison produced the same uncomfortable truth. Something about your connection had reached a place inside them that casual relationships and surface-level conversations could not reach. And then they remembered one particular moment when you could have judged them, misunderstood them, or simply walked away emotionally, but you didn't. You responded with a kind of patience they never expected. That moment became the hidden turning point. They did not tell you. They did not suddenly confess everything. In fact, outwardly, almost nothing changed. But internally, your soulmate began seeing you differently. They started wondering what life would feel like if they stopped protecting themselves from the very connection that made them feel safe enough to be real. Stay till the end, because what they discovered next shocked them. They had spent so much time worrying that opening their heart might make them vulnerable that they never noticed how vulnerable silence had already made them. Silence left them wondering what you thought. Silence left them imagining conversations that never happened. Silence left them watching time move forward without knowing whether the opportunity would still exist tomorrow. And eventually they understood something they could no longer deny: hiding the truth was not giving them peace anymore. It was taking peace away. That realization led your soulmate into the most difficult conversation they have had with themselves. They stopped creating excuses and started asking questions that demanded real answers. Why did your happiness matter so much to them? Why did the thought of disappointing you feel heavier than disappointing almost anyone else? Why could one memory of you completely change their mood? Why did they keep imagining what they would say if they suddenly had only one opportunity to tell you the truth? Something huge is waiting for you, because the answer became impossible to avoid. Your soulmate realized they were not simply missing a person, they were missing the version of themselves that appeared when the connection between you felt open and genuine. Around you, they had imagined becoming more honest, more courageous, more willing to build something meaningful instead of constantly protecting themselves from uncertainty. And this is exactly why they pulled away when things started feeling serious. The connection challenged them. It asked them to become emotionally clearer than they had been before. They were not prepared for that at first. So they chose the familiar comfort of hesitation. But now they understand the price of that choice. Don't skip, because there is another revelation coming. Your soulmate has recently started preparing words they once believed they would never say. They have imagined looking directly at you and admitting, "I made this more complicated than it needed to be."